Okay, so hello, welcome everybody. I think we're just waiting for people to join from the main, the first session, which is still ongoing, but we've got a few introductory words that we can say whilst people join. As you saw from the opening session, if you're in it, a few housekeeping rules. Please could people keep their cameras and their microphones off whilst the speakers are, whilst the panel is in session. You can add chat into the chat bar and we'll pick those up during the Q&A. This session is being recorded and will be available later for everybody to view. There will be pick up during the Q&A session from the chat, but also during that time, if you wish to raise your hand to ask a question, that is also possible and helpful, and we'll pick out from those. So I'm going to share my screen. As I do that, I'll just introduce myself. So I'm Anne Taylor and I'm Associate Director for Funding Operations and Governance at the Wellcome Trust. For those, in addition, we just decided, sorry?
I guess, in terms of the...
If people could mute themselves, sorry, I'm hearing some background there. I'm introducing myself, I've explained what my role is, and just a brief visual description for you. I am a white middle-aged woman with collar length, slightly wavy brown hair, but increasingly going grey. I'm wearing a pale blue short sleeve top, and behind me I have a standard Teams background of white with a few plants at the bottom. Okay, I'm now going to share my screen, and fingers crossed would just now everybody has disappeared. I'm just checking that that's working. If somebody could say something, because I can't actually.
It's working fine.
Thank you very much indeed. So this is just our title slide. This is our perspectives on accountability in research integrity, and we've taken as our inspiration words from the Research Integrity Concordat. And the reason that we have chosen accountability is that in the rewriting from the 2019 Concordat, accountability, it was the new kid on the block. It wasn't in the previous iteration of the Concordat. So we've chosen to focus on this to give everybody an idea of where we think this now sits within our responsibilities. There are three different actors in that are described in the Concordat: the funders, the employers and the researchers. And we're going to give a taster from each of those about what we think accountability is in there. So they're very much personal perspectives. I'm not going to say any more at the moment, so we're going to hand straight on to our first actor in this, who is our researcher, and that's Verity Postlethwaite. I'm going to move on to the next slide, and please do let me know when you need me to move on. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Anne. And again, if someone give me a thumbs up or OK that you can hear me. Yeah, thank you all. I have 5 minutes, which I'm about to start my stopwatch with. It's lovely to be here, and thank you very much for the invite. As Anne did, I'll do a very short overview, but I'll also post in the meeting chat my pure profile. I'm an early career researcher, a white, younger middle-aged woman with longer brown hair and a pink collared shirt on, with a blended background with a lot of natural sunlight, which is glorious on a day like today. My research background is sports governance and policy, and across the past sort of 12 to 14 years, I am a little bit older than I look. I've actually engaged and collaborated and studied at over 12 different higher education institutions, mostly English-based, but I have significant networks in the US, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, and across other home nations in the UK. Partly because my research is based a lot around international, national, domestic sports events and how those benefit communities, and that infamous word of legacy. The reason why I'm here today speaking on behalf of researchers, which is a very broad term, and I'll get onto that in a second, is that back in 2017, I met Rachel at a PhD summer school that the Guild HE hosted as part of their research training support. And as one of the speakers said earlier, I think I'm in the bolshy portion of my career where I'm quite outspoken and I want to be the change in research culture and environment. And I was very privileged earlier this year in April to be part of the UKRI, Cancer Research UK and Guild HE Commission workshop on research integrity and indicators. So I just want to cover, as Anne alluded to, a snapshot of what researchers are accountable for. And the quotes on the slide are based on some informal conversations I've had the past couple of weeks around what others in my networks have sort of thought when I said, what do you think about the Concordat? What do you think about accountability? And I just wanted to take the time on this slide to make a few observations around trends and patterns. Interestingly, career stage gave a notable change to what type of perspective or conversation I had. So I'm still very heavily engaged in postgraduate research and early career researcher networks as part of the British Society for Sports History and the UK Sports Development Network. And younger researchers at the moment, or mature researchers at an earlier career stage, have a real disenfranchised, quite negative opinion of the toxic culture and environment in higher education. So when you say accountability to someone like that, including myself, it's almost a bit humorous and laughable. But there are a lot of people that are either engaging and wanting to be the change, or an interesting trend for my networks is they're actually leaving higher education and going to research in either the public, private or other types of education institutions. Of course, demographic and personal standpoint comes into this, in particular around what discipline you're from. And probably the most interesting thing for me was having a conversation with a colleague from Japan, and they've been exposed to a really different way of being accountable. And accountability isn't actually a universal concept. So when I asked them about it, we had a really interesting conversation around safeguarding, and that's something to think through. Anne, if you could flip to the next slide, and apologies, I'm not using Morse code. There's just an incredible amount of people entering the room right now. So this second slide again uses quotes to illustrate what some of the researchers have said that I've engaged with. The middle quote is someone from the professional services aspect of higher education, which I think captures quite a lot of what sort of external people think about the research culture and accountability. If someone could just mute themselves upon entry, that would be great. And we appear to have lost our slides, Anne. Oh no, we've got them. So in this slide, as you can see from the change in cameras, we've now got a surveillance camera. A lot of people I spoke to were quite combative about whether the Concordat and what researchers should be acting on is around being policed or surveillance perspective versus engaging in a more productive interpersonal community cultural aspect of creating an environment. And I think the next couple of speakers and snapshots will really illustrate some of the more community policy institutional based actions that are happening. A trend that I saw, and coming at this from an early career researcher perspective, is that longer in the tooth researchers are just not buying into this environment point. They see a lot of action at the moment for researchers being around surveillance and doing more, having less time to research because there is more litigious environment. As someone that was born into this and doesn't know anything different, I want to embrace, and like I said at the beginning of this snapshot, be the change. So that's a very whirlwind and slightly over time, 5 minutes, but I'm going to pause there and pass on, and hopefully the next speaker will have nowhere near as much background faff. So if anyone wants to follow up, I'll put my details in the chat and I look forward to discussing.
Great, thank you very much, Verity. I gave you a little time because of all the noise in the background, so very well done for keeping on through. So next up is we are moving on to the employer of researchers, and so I'm going to introduce Rhys. Hopefully, is online.
Hello, can everybody hear me? Yeah,
yes,
great,
that's
excellent.
good.
Thank you very much. So hi, I'm Rhys Morgan. I'm Head of Research Policy, Governance and Integrity at the University of Cambridge. And as for the other speakers, I'm just going to give a short description for anyone who can't see me. So I'm white again in early middle age with wearing a white t-shirt, brown hair and a short beard. I thought, as there's so many people who joined during Verity's talk, I'm just going to give a quick recap on what we're doing here. So we're talking about the new accountability requirement in the Concordat to support research integrity. So this came in the revision that happened a couple of years back. And it's actually on the left-hand side of my slide here is the wording from the Concordat that we're looking at around accountability, which is that collectively, and this is for researchers, funders and institutions, we create a research environment in which individuals and organisations are empowered and enabled to own the research process, and that we ensure that individuals and organisations are held to account when behaviour falls short of the standards set by the Concordat. And what I wanted to do with my 4 minutes is to do two things. Firstly, to say I'm quite happy with half of that and not quite so happy with the other half. So I think there are multiple ways that we can approach the accountability requirement in the Concordat as institutions. And some of these ways are quite basic, and I think these are essential things that we need to do, but they are far from everything that we should. Could we go back a slide? Thank you. They're far from everything we should be doing. And then there's a more advanced approach that we can take, and one I think that we should be holding ourselves accountable for. And the way that it's set out in the Concordat, I think it does very well on part of that around culture and not quite so good around holding people accountable in the second half of that paragraph. So to start off, the basic approach to institutional accountability. So there's two things I think that institutions are very accountable for. Firstly, it is around getting information on integrity out to the community, so delivering training and guidance. This can be done in multiple ways. Often it's farmed out to online training, websites, online guidance, often which aren't read. And it's useful for giving good information on what good practice looks like, what people should do to avoid poor practice. But really, it's a single contact point. It's something that happens maybe once a year at best, and isn't hugely kind of deep. We can have face-to-face training, which is more effective, in my opinion. But again, it still remains a single point of contact and something that happens once a year. And then the second thing that we're held accountable for by the Concordat and by others as well is to make sure that we hold other people to account, so our researchers in our community. This encourages institutions to act like a policeman, as Verity indicated earlier, to investigate breaches of best practice, ensure people are held accountable. And this, of course, is something we really have to be doing, but it has limited long-term utility. It deals with immediate problems and does little in the long run. But these are the things that institutions are judged against, that we're held accountable for, and therefore we're encouraged to focus on them. Could we move on to the next slide, please? And I think we can do quite a lot more, and we should be holding ourselves accountable for quite a lot more. So we should be looking at this as a cultural change that we're accountable for. And again, I think this comes in two forms. So partly this is about building integrity from the ground up. So not just delivering training and giving guidance, but trying to support local communities of researchers and research support staff to make changes at a local level, be that local societies, local innovations, etc. And providing researchers with, and particularly PIs, with the tools that they need and the knowledge they need to create local cultures that are amenable to best practice. How do they encourage openness, humility, positive leadership in their local communities? So it's not just about saying what is integrity, how do you avoid best practice, but also how do we change day-to-day practice in a way that makes best practice a norm within our local communities. And secondly, rather than just thinking about institutions as policemen, we also want to build up a learning culture similar to the airline model. So while we have to maintain disciplinary action for deliberate acts, we should be looking at what we can do to tackle mistakes through re-education and support, make sure we learn from cases of misconduct or poor practice in our institutions, and importantly, encouraging corrections and retractions where appropriate, trying to destigmatize these and mediating in disputes. Now, this is a lot harder for institutions and has much less in the way of immediate reward and compliance requirements attached to it. But it's far better for the community in the long run, and I think is something that institutions can do. And so just before I finish, swinging back to the Concordat, I think that first paragraph is very good on that first thing around building up culture. But I think we perhaps could look again at the wording around that second half. You know, is it simply about holding people accountable for their behaviour, or is it about trying to learn from mistakes and changing the way that we look at poor practice and grow where there are mistakes? And I'll pass over to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Rhys. I hope people are beginning to see a theme coming through all of these, and moving on to the funders. I will pick up the theme hopefully in the next talk. So the third section that are discussed in the Concordat are the funders, and if you actually look at all the requirements of the funders in the Concordat, they can be grouped into themes, which I've shown here, and a lot of these, I think, as Rhys alluded to, are about instruction and regulation. So we need to be clear about what we expect of people, and we need to be transparent about what we do. And then there is that stick part of managing misconduct effectively, but also confidentially. And I think this is where we start to see the cultural aspects creep in, and quite rightly so, because it is more than just having rules and telling people what to do. It's encouraging, and it's developing, and it's working in partnership. And that's where the fourth theme to me is so important, is for supporting the cultural shifts. And I think in general, the mood in the community is moving more away from the stick and much more towards the carrot. So if you take those themes of what funders are accountable for and look at where we are now, the pictures I've put on here, to me, kind of express where I think we are now, where we're going. So the first is more about sort of things linked together, atoms, but we're all a bit discreet. So we're all making sure that we publish things on our websites, that we manage things very closely within our own organisations. And we try and work with others, but it's much more, I will work with you on a one-to-one basis. And I think where we need to be moving to, and certainly where Welcome is going, and I know other funders are as well, is moving more towards this kind of tree, this encouraging, this encompassing notion of how we look at research integrity. And these are much harder to make ourselves accountable for, but in that one description in the Concordat, it is about encouraging and nurturing and being responsible for creating that environment that makes people perform better and have integrity at the heart of everything they do. So the direction of travel for Welcome is moving towards supportive areas, thinking about equity, diversity and inclusion, and that will be picked up in a session later today. And I think all of these areas of future focus about partnerships, sustainability, all those areas bring the Research Integrity Concordat very closely in alignment with the Researcher Concordat for career development, because that also is all about these areas. And I think if the two areas can work closely together that way, drive towards the same ends of a nurturing, sustainable and supportive environment, I think research integrity will naturally improve as part of that environment. So that's where I see the funders currently and where I see them going. The Concordat as a thing has existed for some while. Many of you will know that there was a Science and Technology inquiry in 2018, it was now. And for the next slot in this, we're moving on to the next new kid on the block, which has arisen out of that inquiry. And so I am going to close my part and hand over to our next speaker, UK Corey.
Thank you, Anne. And I have no slides because I thought I'd rather talk to my talk. So if you want to minimise the slides or not, I'm happy. But my name's Andrew George. I'm the co-chair together with Rachel Guberman-Hill of the UK Committee on Research Integrity. In terms of physical appearance, I'm a middle-aged white. I'm proud to say that if this had been done in December, I would have been 12 kilograms heavier than I am now. So that is my little advance over the way. But I'm afraid living healthier has done nothing to my baldness, and that has remained unchanged. So the UK Committee on Research Integrity, very recently set up. We're having our second meeting actually this coming Monday. And our role, which was what we're going to be accountable to, what we are accountable to, which was recommended by the Select Committee of the House of Commons, is to work with the sector to maintain and support high integrity in research across all research environments and all disciplines, and also to support the good governance of research conduct. But there's a lot of unpacking that we need to do with that one. And I think there's several starting points that we need to start with. I mean, first of all, the Research Integrity Concordat is really a critical, a foundational document for our work going forward. And that's one that we are going to really base most of what we're doing clearly on that one. I think to pick up some of the themes that we've already heard from speakers already, research misconduct, of course, it is a very real issue. It's one that needs continual attention. It's one that we need to get right as a community in order to make sure that we maintain confidence in the research enterprise by all of the stakeholders, including the public, including other researchers. But I think as we've heard from others already, probably the greatest potential damage to research and the greatest damage to confidence in research are around questionable research practices and sloppy research rather than egregious bad actions. And therefore, very much I would outline what Rhys, what Anne and Verity have been saying, that we need to really work hard to improve the research culture to make sure this has happened. The second point is that we are going to have to work, well, we are working already with other key bodies, and this includes COPE, UK RIO, UK Reproducibility Network, but also ones that are further out, the NC3Is in terms of animal experimentation, and of course the research, the RI signatories group that are hosting this meeting. And these organisations play an absolutely vital role in the research integrity landscape. And clearly, the Committee on Research Integrity cannot reproduce, should not reproduce, and certainly should not compete with these various bodies who are doing their work. Our work is to look across the whole landscape and across all of the sectors. Which leads us on to the third point. And the third point is that our goal is to work across all of the disciplines and across all of the sectors. That includes universities, includes government-funded research that's not funded through UKRI. It also includes work in the private sector. I think that there's a lot to be gained from this, not only in terms of looking at research integrity across all of those sectors, but also learning from these different sectors, the different solutions, the different ways in which they address them. The issues and the pressures and the drivers and the cultures, for example, to take two extremes in the private sector as opposed to the university sector, are very different. And actually, what can we learn about from each other in order to improve the environment across all of those different sectors? I also think that the working across disciplines is key, and this is something, of course, that's already going on considerably, but we need to help researchers and institutions and stakeholders understand how to interpret the various facets of research integrity for disciplines that have got different ontologies and different epistemologies. What does, for example, proper attribution of others' contribution mean to a biomedical scientist like myself, or to an anthropologist where that contribution might be coming from an underprivileged group, or for a researcher in fine arts whose work builds on other work? And it's a problem that we are really going to have to, I think, is going to be really fascinating to unpick a bit more of that one. And I think what we've got to do going forward is to build on the work that places like UK RIA have done of making sure that what we do is evidence-based and also has academic rigour in what we are doing. Then the fourth point is around mapping the landscape and in doing so to simplify it and to make it more comprehensible. I don't think we mustn't simply layer on more complications. And indeed, I'd like to see a way of going behind the various concordats and agreements, which sometimes can look to researchers. I don't think they are, but they can look to researchers like overlapping jigsaw pieces that don't quite fit together. And building on the work that we heard from Daniel in the first session, see the bigger picture, very much as Anne suggested in her talk. The final thing that we're going to be accountable for, which is perhaps the major piece of work that the sector is going to see, is we are commissioned to produce an annual report on research integrity across the UK. And to do that, we're going to have to work with the sector, with the various stakeholders, because that is where the evidence is, that's where the knowledge is. But we're going to have to work to be able to produce that report. And we're going to have to work on indicators that allow us to take the temperature of that. And doing that, we're going to have to very much build on the work that's been done by Guild HE, Cancer Research UK and UKRI on that. So I think this is a really exciting moment. I think in the UK, there's a palpable momentum in this area. We need to build on it. We need to help it really manifest itself. We need to help it to make sure that the research that we do is the very best that it can be, that it is good in every meaning of the word good, both moral and also in terms of successful research. It's early days for the Committee on Research Integrity. As I said, our second meeting is next Monday. I will post in the chat an email address, because if you want to get involved, keep in touch, join a community of interested people, a network of interested people, then we are trying to build that up. And so we would be really welcoming wider input from the whole group. If we're going to be successful, we have got to be owned by the whole sector, to be developed by the whole sector. So I'll stop there, Anne, if I may, and hopefully made up some time. And I look forward to hearing people's comments, questions, and understanding more where people are coming from. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Andrew. So for those who joined late, the plan of this session was to have the 4 short talks, a Q&A now, and then follow up with James and Rachel talking about the support that can be provided to the community to help them improve research integrity. Whilst people think of questions, because Verity was right at the beginning, I think some people perhaps missed some of her talk. I thought whilst the questions come in, I'd give her a chance for a couple of minutes to either reprise some of the things that she had said, or to perhaps provide any comment that has come to mind whilst other speakers have been talking about how a researcher maybe would react to some of the things that have been said.
Thanks, Anne. I think I'll just come in with a comment, and I think Rachel and James are going to pick this up, so it'll literally be 30 seconds. This speaks to where the researcher sees themselves and whether they actually take accountability for furthering their own knowledge in this area. So already we've heard of a lot of reviews, a lot of documents, a lot of spaces where people can engage. There's a great comment and question from Natasha in the chat around different sectors being involved. So I think the researcher has to understand that they aren't necessarily going to be given all of this, and it's not going to be bite-sized. And it goes back to the point I was trying to raise in the second slide around this being a little bit like the ecological model. So we seem to be really gaining momentum around policies and culture, but how will that filter through institutions, networks, interpersonal and personal? I think Andrew and Rhys both made, and Anne, you both all made comments about the positionality and the philosophy of the individual, but how can we better knit those into some of those bridging sort of layers of the interpersonal and organisational? So certainly I go beyond the institution I work at, beyond the discipline I work in, to make sure I'm interconnected. And I'm just going to put a bold statement out there, is I think younger researchers and early career researchers are trained to do that. However, those longer into their careers and those very fatigued with litigious cultures are very resistant and hesitant to doing that. And that's my perspective of someone that's early career. So I'm just going to throw that grenade out there and mute myself again.
Great, thanks. Yes, I think that's a subject that comes up often, is the different sections of researchers and how they've been either brought up with these things or having to learn it on the way, and how we do this. I see there is a question for Rhys in the chat, and maybe you could pick up on that point if you've got time as well, about how organisations address different areas of researchers. But I'm just reading the question. Provide guidance. At my institution, we provide guidance and training, but also a consistent central contact point for advice and informal mediation. We find this has helped build a culture of question asking. Is this something that others are finding it challenging to provide? I'm just wondering, Rhys, whether there's anything you would like to pick up on that.
Yeah, I think, yeah, this is something that we're trying to do as well at Cambridge. I think it is something that's hard to do consistently across a very large institution, in terms of making sure that you can mediate everywhere. And it requires a kind of more devolved approach to try and get that right. And I want to be clear that what I was talking about in my slides was not some sort of indication that Cambridge is doing all of those advanced things that I mentioned. It's a lot of it is aspirational. But I think it's right that we need to give people options for who to contact, but I don't think in every institution it's going to be possible that it'll be a central administrator performing that role. And so it may well be that we need to look at different models for different institutions, some of which will have devolved structures in place. But it's a real challenge, I think, to ensure that people feel comfortable coming forward to talk about these issues, particularly when often the people who they would be coming to talk to would also be the people organising a research misconduct investigation. And so, you know, it's like going to have an informal chat with the police when you're worried about you might have broken the law. I mean, you're not going to do it. So I think there needs to be structures in place to make it easier for people to come and have those conversations. Great.
Thank you. And that sort of advice actually links through to the next question that I've picked up is from Grace, saying that research misconduct process is viewed very much as a policing, and what we need to be moving towards is identifying lessons and providing further guidance and support. I could see Verity nodding there. I don't know whether there's anything, firstly, Verity, you'd like to come in on, and then I think it would be useful to bring in James and Rachel on this one as well.
Yeah, just again, very quickly, similar to building on the point that Andrew is making about learning from other sectors, governance across sport has a really high level of scrutiny around integrity issues. So, for example, doping or human rights breaches or very, very poor and misconduct behaviour in sports organisations. So I think learning from some of their lessons, in particular around yes, there has to be an element of compliance and there has to be consensus around what the standards are, but then building the understanding that in a slightly contrasting view to Rhys, that there has to be a space for someone to come in and report that, but also it's also about self-governance and good governance of you and your immediate sphere. So it's not always about who can you go to and the space you can go to. That does need to be there. And the Tanny Gray-Thompson review of sport integrity, which came out, I can post it in the chat in a second, is something to look at. So again, the suggestion there was to bring in an ombudsman, which I don't necessarily think that the higher education needs, but it's getting that viewpoint. And I'll leave that there because I think James and Rachel have some really strong views on this, but learning from other sectors I think is a cracking point.
I'm just wondering, because a lot of the themes in the chat are about support that we provide. I'm wondering if actually this is a good point to go to James and Rachel's little 5-minuters, and we can go through the support that can be provided by the two of you. And then if we've got time at the end, we can pick up on some further points. thumbs up for that, James, because you'd be up next. Is that okay? Yeah, right. In that case, I will share my screen again. Having to do it twice is a challenge in one session. Just let me know if that's worked for everyone.
Thank you, that's visible. Also, a couple of attendees have their cameras on. I don't think they realise it. There's no way to send a personal message in Teams, so I don't want to single it out, but can you please check you haven't got your camera on, because some of you are live and can be seen. I don't think you realise it. Okay, so accountability is new in the Concordat, but it's not a new thing for research. This isn't something new. The good news is you're doing a lot of this already. Authorship is a good example of this, something fundamental to research practice. It says, and it's often seen as being about credit. This is the person or people who did the work, but it's also about accountability. These are the people taking public responsibility for the accuracy and validity of this research. So this isn't something other, it's part of your everyday work, working out what best practice is for you in your research and then incorporating into what you do. It applies to all disciplines and all career stages. The specifics will vary, but the overall kind of ethos and themes remain the same, and this is something that is active and continuous. From the moment you come up with a theory idea to the moment you disseminate it and move on to something else. This isn't something that works as a standalone element of good research practice, has to be supported. By coincidence, echoing what Verity just said, there are layers to this. I think we do need, as researchers, we all need to be self-critical and to engage in reflective practice, to think about what good research practice, because that's what this is about. Research integrity is basically a fancy way of saying good research practice. What is good practice for me in my research, and sticking to that in difficult circumstances. But you can't do that alone. There are other layers of this. There's the role of organisations, which Rhys has already touched on, to give practical support, and above all time, because we have very huge time pressures in our career to achieve this. And we need to have environments where there's no stigma attached to asking for help, where we have setbacks, not failures. You know, if we get negative results, that's not the end of the world, and the system doesn't view it as the end of the world, so we don't view it as the end of the world. There's been no stigma attached to that, and organisations and researchers can't do this on their own. There are other layers. Funders and policymakers, above all else, need to make sure their systems and the incentives that come out of them help, not get in the way of researchers and organisations achieving that. And this is all part of long-term cultural changes. People in the chat said cultural change is long-term work, it's hard to sustain. Compliance will only take us so far. Training and development will take us a bit further, but this is leadership and long-term change. And research culture is the sum of its parts. It's shaped a lot by systems, so bodies like the Wellcome, like UK Core, have a lot to do with sort of looking at systems, but individual researchers also make up research culture, and there's individual things we can do to affect change, and that change needs to be recognised and incentivised. In terms of support, I'll let Rachel talk about Guild HE, and I'm talking quite fast because we're at time pressures. UK RIO is an independent charity that gives practical advice on research integrity. I've put some links in the chat. Have a look at our website. We do a wide variety of publications, webinars, training, all sorts of things. So there'll be some stuff of interest of you. I will now be quiet and let Rachel speak.
Thanks very much, James. Sorry for my amateur control of the slides. Every time I touch my computer, it seems to move them.
I do the same. It's absolutely fine.
Thanks very much for that, James. And over now to Rachel. I will move the slides on deliberately, hopefully this time.
Lovely, thank you, and hello everybody. My name is Rachel Persia. I'm the Policy Manager for Research and Innovation at Guild HE. I am a white female. I'm going to say I'm late young age as opposed to middle age. I've got middle. It's not as dark as it looks. I'm just, yeah, it's a very sunny day today. So to take you through some of the things that we provide, I mean, we are one of the signatories of the Concordat to support research integrity, and we joined the group in 2021, which we were over the moon about because it gives us a seat at that table and allows us to work with the other many organisations on there to work towards the commitments that are laid out for the signatories. You can read all of those on page 1 of the document, so I won't repeat them now. What I wanted to take you through is the way that we work to support those commitments. So Guild HE Research is the dedicated research consortium for Guild HE. Guild HE is a representative body for smaller and specialist universities in the UK. And we're unusual to have our own dedicated consortium, and it was born out from a need to share services between environments that were doing research but were maybe pockets of excellence around the country, and needed some support to buy infrastructure together, essentially. We've grown a lot since then, and we work a lot with our research leads and research directors, and they may be directors of research, pro-vice chancellors of research, or offices, research managers of offices. And here I've included a quote from one of our research managers that really outlines the weight of responsibility that ends up on the shoulders of one individual within one of these offices. And you get a sense of, you know, the need to translate the guidance and the information available about research integrity to creative specialisms or other specialisms as well. Within the group, we have practice research, lots of applied research, research in humanities, arts, creative is very strong, and some of the guidance can be a bit unwieldy in those domains. This individual will also be responsible for the REF, for research degree awarding powers, for many other functions of the research office, alongside research integrity. So it's really important that we can help fill in the gaps of the time they don't have to understand the policies that pertain to this area. So one of our major roles is to listen to those perspectives and to really understand what it feels like to be a square peg in this integrity landscape, what their challenges are in those specialist disciplines, and kind of give them a forum to understand how that plays out for them. To give a good example, it's where you've got very niche subject areas, and this will exist in research intensive universities as well, but where you've got such a small community researching that particular area. So integrity and misconduct cases can be very, very difficult to investigate, purely down to the numbers of people involved in the institution or the area of practice. We also like to raise awareness of integrity concepts amongst our members, particularly those with really emerging research environments. So some institutions have no research going on at the moment and they want to build that up, and we help support them to do that. And we work with the principle that all institutions should be aiming for good research integrity and aiming high on these compliances, regardless of where they're coming from and how much research they have, with a view to becoming a good partner in the future. So we try to raise awareness in that way. We create a critical mass of people and community of researchers, through from our doctoral students all the way to senior researchers and research managers, so that they take them out of that relative isolation that they are in, to talk to each other about across boundaries, across regions of the UK, to understand how these things work for them and how they can support each other. We also seek to address gaps in infrastructure, and I think infrastructure is a really tricky area for a lot of institutions, and particularly for small institutions. The costs of infrastructure to manage these things starts to become a bigger proportion of the available money for research. So that's we negotiate shared services where they are appropriate, although obviously for ethics and stuff that there are some limitations on how much can be shared between institutions. And our final kind of role is to reflect all of that back to the various fora that exist in the sector, including the signatories group, but also working with partners, whether that's new entities like UK CORI or UK RIO, to really understand what these challenges are and bring them into other initiatives that are going on. As was mentioned earlier, we are part of a group sponsoring a project about exploring research integrity indicators, and here we can really kind of provide some different voices that have some different perspectives on research integrity, so that we can co-create new initiatives with everyone in mind, regardless of what institution, discipline or who they are. So I think in kind of conclusion, we really have a responsibility, both as a signatory and as a representative body, to support the creation of the culture that we all want to make. we're always willing to hear what else we could do. We are a very small team. I am a team of 1 at the moment in research at Guild HE, but we're always willing to listen as well, and happy to hear from anyone that would like to chat further. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much indeed to all of our speakers. We have run out of time. I think we are a very packed day today, all super stuff, so we don't want to keep people from other sessions. For those questions where we've not been able to answer them in this session, we will make sure they get answered and get back out to all of the attendees. And so it just remains for me to really say thank you so much to everybody. They put a lot, all of the presenters I know have put a lot of work into what they presented today. We are all very much here to speak to anybody who wishes to contact us separately. So without further ado, I will close this session and see you in the next one. Thank you very much indeed. Take care. Bye-bye.